So we are recording this a few days before it comes out, but me and you connected because you said you're working on a story that a lot of our local people here will want to hear about. But you're working on a pretty big story on Bo Nix right now, right?
Yeah, obviously Bo got named the Broncos starting quarterback last week. He's going to be the first Broncos week one rookie quarterback since John Elway 41 years ago in 1983. Um, Bo should be able to clear the bar of that start, by the way. John Elway, one of eight, 14 yards, four sacks, and an interception. So, and got benched in the middle of the game against Jack Lambert and the Steelers. So I think Bo's going to be able to clear that bar. But yeah, and Gary, that's how I connected with you, is because I've been working for some time on basically the theme of this story with Bo is this is just the latest time in his football career that he has sort of been ahead of the proverbial curve, right? He was an eighth grade starter at Scottsboro High School there in 2014. In 2019, he became the first Auburn true freshman starting quarterback, I believe, since shortly after World War II, if I have that right. Obviously, there was some time there. There was some time there where freshmen didn't play varsity football, but
Right.
he first guy in a long time to have that role, and then now, like we mentioned, having that role at the Broncos. So just trying to kind of dig in, go to his background a little bit, understand what it is about Nix that has allowed him to kind of expedite that process sort of everywhere he's been.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a theme. Like I think when me and you were messaging, I did trace back. I forget. I think I was at a Hewitt Trustful High School playoff game this particular night. But when he was an eighth grader at Scottsboro, this is a game that people will still talk about, even though it's a decade later. It'll be one they talk about forever. When you look up records and stuff like that, Alabama high school football, and you kind of have to do that double take because how does an eighth grader lead you to 50 points in a game and you lose by 5 touchdowns? I'm going to say that again. 50 points and you lose by 5 touchdowns. That game was an 85-50 game. And I'm pretty sure because at the time I was editor of this newspaper, and the guy that was more of our sports guy then, messaging me, and he's like, I don't think I'm gonna hit deadline tonight. Like, I think I'm gonna go a little past. Why? And he was like, well, the score is this. And I was like, are you kidding? But
Yeah.
Bo Nix was the quarterback in that game. Completion percentage not that great, but he's an eighth grader going against what was the eventual state champion, who had a really good defense. And he threw 5 touchdowns, threw for 190 yards or something like that against them. And it was kind of that, okay, sure, completion percentage be what it may. Who is this kid? Everybody
Yeah.
knew his dad. His dad, Patrick, played at Auburn. And this was just Patrick's kid at the time. And he really said on that night, I'm Bo and I'm here, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. I talked to DK Billingsley, who was the really good running back on that Scottsboro team, ultimately
Yeah.
went on to play at Troy and is now an assistant coach under Patrick Nix at a Central Phoenix High School there, and just kind of gave me that kind of insight into even when he started that first game earlier that season. I think it was against Fort Payne, and
Okay.
he had again, the statistics weren't great, but it was just this kind of, they didn't feel like they were working with an eighth grader. Helped that he was already like 6'1" or 6'2". But it was just the kind of the poise with which he handled that. And I it was kind of funny. I talked to Bo a little bit for this story about a week and a half ago, and I found a picture from that start. And I can't remember what the publication was, but it was a picture of Bo in that game. And I show him, and I said, what do you know about, or what do you remember about this kid, right? A decade
Yeah.
ago. And the first, he kind of smiles, but then the first thing he says is, I was very prepared, which is just a crazy thing to hear from a guy who was in eighth grade at the time. But I think that gives an insight into just like what his sort of mindset has always been, that the way for him to get ahead was always going to be his preparation, right? And you stack that on top of the fact that he was and still is a very good athlete. I think some of the Broncos people even that scouted him and evaluated have been a little bit surprised by just how live his arm is, how well he's able to move. Those things have all, I think, been a pleasant surprise. But he knew from a young age that if you're going to kind of get ahead of this very competitive, market of young quarterbacks, you were going to have to do it by way of preparation. That's the only way you can even become an eighth grade starter in the first place. And then to your point, playing a game in the state playoffs as an eighth grader in which you throw 5 touchdowns, which tied a Scottsboro school record. And, but to your point, still was 35 points short. I mean, Clay Chalkville had Nico Collins and a bunch of other dudes. And, talked to Jerry Hood, who was the head coach of that team that you were nice enough to hook me up with there. And Jerry said, that was one of those games where I don't think I've been more frustrated walking off a field. He's like, because here we are scoring every play, but they're scoring every other play. And it was just, kind of wild. But yeah, to your point, it was definitely like, okay, who is this kid? And then by the time he was starting as a freshman the following year at Scottsboro, it was like he was already a veteran.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope those interviews went well. Who else locally were you able to talk to? Because Coach Hood, I've known him for probably well over a decade now, and he's always one of my favorite interviews.
Yeah, he was great.
He's got a lot of personality when he talks to you. Who else were you able to connect with?
Yeah, Coach Floyd, who's over there now is the head coach at Clay Chalkville, was the OC at the time of that Scottsboro game in 14, and then he was later, he went to some other places as well. Coach Hood eventually then was later an assistant at Chalkville when Bo went over to Pinson Valley, and then Justin Burdett, who has been at Clay since about the time Bo got to Pinson, and his line that I loved was, he's like, yeah, I have one state championship ring, but I tell everybody if it wasn't for Bo Nix, I'd have 3. And I was, I found him on your podcast and kind of relayed that story where it's just like, we're about to win this game or have a chance to go drive to win this game. The snap goes over Bo's head and you're thinking like, oh man, we got him. We're going to do this. And then he goes back 10 yards, gets it, scrambles around about 20 more, and then makes a throw to the other side of the field to pick up a first down. And that was sort of that just winning quality that he had, where it's just like, okay, we're mixing the preparation, we're mixing the athleticism, but then we're just adding this, like, just kind of finding a way.
Yeah, no, that just those two schools. So when Bo is at Pinson Valley and then Clay Chalkville, like if you just look in the past, decade or so, like that Scottsboro game, Nico Collins was a sophomore maybe at that time. I forget. And, obviously he doing what he's doing with the Texans, and some of those funny stories have started to come out about Jim Harbaugh sleeping in his house, recruiting him and stuff like that. But the senior receiver star on that team was TJ Simmons, who started out going to Alabama, ultimately goes to West Virginia. You had the quarterback Ty Pigram. He ended up playing college football at multiple places, but I think he started off, I can't remember. I think he started off at Maryland, and then I think he spent some time maybe at Western Kentucky and maybe somewhere else. I forget, but he was an all-world high school football quarterback. And then Bo Nix, once he got to Pinson Valley, he had some crossover playing with Kool-Aid McKinstry, who's with the New Orleans Saints now.
Yeah,
they were teammates. So those games did not lack talent, and they did not lack offensive execution by any means. Those were always epic games to cover.
And were those two schools? Let me ask you a question. Were those two schools rivals? Have they been rivals for a long time? Because I just look at the map and it seems geographically they're right there.
Yeah. So what's actually funny is, I'm gonna try to get this right. It's been a long time since I've done some of these like more newsy type stories with it, but Clay doesn't have its own zip code, or at least it didn't, and I don't know why that was. Something with post office stuff and government that I don't pretend to understand. So there's, Clay is its own city, but it will have a Pinson like zip code.
Oh, gotcha.
So these schools like border each other. Like, I mean, they're right next door to each other, and you've got that much talent crammed into a couple of cities that aren't that big, so you get people who move in. That happens everywhere. But the last decade or so, I don't know that there's been more talent maybe even in the Southeast than in our little corner of Jefferson County, Alabama, than in this Clay, Pinson, Palmerdale, Chalkville area. It's
Well,
been just jam packed.
yeah, just the names that you're bringing up, it would definitely seem to give credence to that. I mean, I was talking to, yeah, Coach Burdett, and he said, obviously a lot of people they'll say Texas, they'll say California, they'll say Florida, but they'll seems like y'all will plant your flag in the ground with just about anybody of saying like the talent here is just as good.
Yeah, yeah. It certainly has been. There's a lot of really good really good football in this area. Maybe at times not the top of the top, but consistently kind of that really solid middle of recruits and that kind of thing. We've definitely got that here, especially in the Birmingham, Alabama area. It's like I
Yeah.
said, it's just absolutely jam packed with talent.
Well, I think I thought it was interesting that, obviously Scottsboro closer up to Huntsville, right?
Hmm.
And then Pinson and Clay down there outside of Birmingham. But the fact that was the other aspect of it that I found interesting was that eighth grade year that Bo loses to Clay Chalkville, that who, they only played because of the playoff format,
Yeah,
right? They weren't geographical rivals.
right,
But
right.
then to end up at the school that is their rival. So I would assume, so Pinson beat Clay in back-to-back state semifinals, Bo's junior and senior season. Did they also play each other like within the regular season as well? To your
Bro,
recollection?
I would have to look back and see when they played, because I don't remember. We get this the reclassification every couple
Yeah,
years shakes
sure.
up. There was a time where Pinson Valley was 5A, but they've been 6A. Clay Chalkville's always been 6A, so I'm filling a gap in time here while I look this up. So
Yeah.
let's see. So they played, yes. So in 2017
Uh-huh.
they played. I can't remember if I was at this game or not, but they Clay Chalkville lost to Pinson in the semifinals, like 37-7 or something. It was a
Okay.
it was a blowout. But they played in the regular season, and it was a 34-32 game.
Wow. Okay.
I'm pretty sure I was at that one. I think Pinson won that one as well. And then yeah, a year later, 2018, yeah, they played in the regular season. They played almost. It's starting to come back a little. They played almost. They played almost identical games. Both games at Pinson Valley. The first game in September 2018, Pinson wins 28-21, and then in the semis at Pinson Valley, they win 28-20. So I
Oh,
mean,
wow.
just incredible matchups. And then yeah, again in 2019, they played in the regular season, and that was another 31-7 game for Pinson Valley. So now that Bo is gone, the tide has shifted back, and Clay Chalkville's won three in a row. So
Yeah, well, it's funny. It's just you can imagine like here's this eighth grader loses this state playoff game, and everybody is saying like, oh, this kid is going to probably be something. Like he's off to a good start, and his just getting to know, talking to some people behind the scenes at Auburn, at Oregon, the competitive part of him, they all say like, I'm sure that like that was. It was something that he was thinking about by the time he gets there as a junior at Pinson is like, I get to go play against this team, even though it was entirely differently constructed, probably not
yeah,
many players the same. It's still like, hey, that school took me out, in 2014. We're gonna give it to him. I mean, even it was funny. He got asked a few weeks ago, kind of earlier in training camp, before he had been named the starter. Was asked kind of like what it would mean, that he played this game last year against Washington in Seattle,
yeah,
and they lose this really close game, and that's ultimately what kept Oregon from being able to chase the national
right.
championship. And and he was essentially asked like, have you forgotten about, is that you've forgotten about that, moved on from it? And he said, I hope I never forget about it. I hope I never forget the way that feels. And he's like, so we have a chance to go up there again this week. I'm glad it's there to like get it done again. He's not going to be playing
Oh yeah,
Washington again. It's not even like the same, it's not the
Seahawks.
same
Yeah,
opponent. Yeah. But it's just like, I just think it gives a window into sort of some of that competitiveness that, getting to talk to some of the, but who, by the way, everybody just like within minutes. Yeah. I've never had such an easy time getting a hold of people. Once you have their number and just saying, hey, anytime um, they were all very, very helpful. But yeah, you just kind of got that insight into who he was.
Yeah, that Southern hospitality down here now.
Yeah. Well, let me like one other guy. So it's interesting. There's another guy on this roster for the Broncos named Chris Abrams Drain.
Okay,
He played his high school football at Spanish Fort. And they lost the state championship game in 2019, the 6A title to I think
success.
I think Oxford was who they were playing. And
Yeah, that sounds right.
yeah, and Ben Blackman was the coach of Spanish Fort, and it was funny because Abrams Drain, most of his career at Spanish Fort was a receiver. Um,
Yeah,
played some defensive back too, but then that year in 2019, early in the year, their quarterback that they just it wasn't even that he got hurt. I think they just were not moving the football. They had all these like title aspirations. They weren't moving the football. They were maybe 2-2. And Blackman says, "Hey, we're gonna just give the ball to our best athlete and let him play." And so they turned for 1 year Abrams Drain into a kind of an RPO, do it all kind of quarterback, and gets them all the way to the state title game. And they might have won had he not gotten hurt, I guess, on the last possession when playing defense, and so he couldn't quarterback them. They were down by a point. So yeah, another Alabama tie out here in Denver. Um, Abrams Dre and I have the same birthday, so I was like, okay, I got it. This kid's
that's
probably all right.
that's a small world. Yeah, I was looking back at that 2019 season because you don't see this. Like that Spanish 14 finished 9-5. Like
Yeah,
a 9-5 team that they get into the playoffs. They've got to play the first two on the road. They win those, then they get to come back home and they win those. Pretty, I mean, let's see, four of their five playoff games were incredibly close. They win by a touchdown, then they won by 42 at Wetumpka, and then they beat Park Crossing by a touchdown, beat
wow.
Opelika on a field goal, and then lose 14-13 to Oxford down in Auburn. So that's wow. That was a dream run that came up a couple points short.
Yeah, no, that's pretty wild. And so then he went to Missouri, and they kind of started him as a receiver as well there. And so he really only had about a year and a half, 2 years or so of playing full time defensive back, and he still showed enough to get drafted in the fifth round by Denver this year. He got off to a slow start in the offseason program during the spring OTAs mini camp. But they were really impressed with how he came back in training camp and made the 53 man roster. So we got two Alabama prep stars on the Denver Broncos.
Yeah, and then just one other connection that you mentioned, like him, like Bo not wanting to forget about that Washington game, and they're going up to open the season at Seattle Seahawks. Offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb
Mm.
was Washington's offensive coordinator who came down here to Alabama and had a quick cup of coffee at the facility and then went off to Seattle. So,
Yeah,
another just weird connection there.
that was kind of Nick Saban's sort of like that. That was the thing for a while, right? You just come in, you touch the magic Alabama program, and then go off into the world.
That's it, and it is magic. As an
Yeah.
Alabama fan, it is magic. Yeah, so we'll see what new coach Kalen DeBoer can do. I think he's going to be legit.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Well, plenty. Obviously, you mentioned that was the other funny thing is that for a long time when John Elway was the general manager of the Broncos, it almost became a thing that they just never drafted Alabama players, despite obviously the fact that Alabama tends to produce a few good ones. Um, but ever since George Payton became the general manager in 2021, the Broncos have just gone after Alabama players like like there's a fire sale on them. Pat Sertan, of course, was the one that
yeah,
started it all there in 2021. He was the ninth overall pick, already arguably the best corner in the NFL.
yeah,
And if not, he's in the conversation for sure. And they had that a couple off seasons prior, they had signed Kareem Jackson.
yeah.
They signed this offseason Levi Wallace, who was originally
Oh yeah,
a walk on there at Alabama.
yeah.
Um, out of Tucson, Arizona, which is not far from where I'm from, and signed him. So they've been a little bit more willing to kind of go after Alabama players recently, which to me just seems like a smart strategy.
Yeah, it's worked pretty well for a lot of teams.
Yeah, no doubt.
So
So
so what for Bo? Like, I kind of want to ask this two ways, I guess. Like, first, I know every year, this is always talked about with NFL draft, when does the run on quarterbacks in the first round begin, right? Who's going to make that reach and really start that domino effect. Were you surprised at all that Denver took him when they did? Like, or did that seem like an obvious thing to you?
I think it was. I had a pretty strong feeling that the Broncos were going to draft a quarterback, and as the draft got closer, it just seemed like it was either going to be him or JJ McCarthy. And what we found out in retrospect was Sean Payton was deliberately trying to put out a lot of smoke screens. He himself admitted that made it seem as if their interest was in JJ McCarthy just to kind of shuffle that deck. But when they went to Oregon in March, they had a workout with Bo Nix there. And Sean Payton has said, of course, it was preceded with a meeting. The night before these one-on-one workouts, they download them with a bunch of information, more than they can handle, because they want to see what they can regurgitate the next morning. So they're already blown away in the meeting with what he was able to do. And then Sean Payton said 16 throws into that private workout. They said, this is the guy that we want. And of course, look, would they want Jaden Daniels? Sure. But knowing where they were going to be in that rotation, he was going to be top two pick. And so he became their guy. So once that was the case, look, the Broncos, the best way that you can kind of dig out of a financial hole and try to still have some success is by having a rookie contract quarterback. It's just the way the NFL works, is because that position takes up such a huge chunk of your salary cap that if you can have a guy making a rookie contract wage who is performing at a high level, it allows you to cover up a lot of this stuff on the roster. It's especially important for the Broncos. Once they decided to release Russell Wilson, they took on $85 million of his contract over the next 2 years. It can be a real anchor. And so you knew that the way out of that, especially having the number 12 pick, not really having anybody else on the roster, obviously Jarrett Stidham, another Auburn guy, that they liked, but hadn't shown that he was going to be an obvious starting quarterback. You just got the sense that was going to be their way out, that Sean Payton himself was going to want the opportunity to work with one of those young passers. And throughout the process, a lot of people just connected the dots of, a lot of the things that Bo Nix did well, specifically as he got to Oregon and kind of improved there, was the getting rid of the ball quickly, the understanding what the defense is trying to do, the aversion to taking sacks, which was a huge problem in Denver the last 2 years. All those things really connected with the way that Sean Payton liked to run an offense. So I wasn't entirely surprised. In fact, when we went around, everybody, all the reporters covering, passed around a couple. You pass around a bowl and you put a little piece of paper, just saying who you think they're going to ultimately end up with that night, who they're going to draft. And I just thought for a while that Nix was going to be the matchup. And the reason why I wasn't surprised they took him at 12 is because, the Broncos weren't the only ones trying to throw smoke screens. Like, there was talk that maybe the Raiders, who needed a quarterback, were also interested in Nix, that the Los Angeles Rams, who were picking 19th, were going to come up and get him as well. So once you have your guy, like, don't get cute and try to trade back and get another couple picks just so that you can, draft him later. It didn't make sense. The stakes were too high to run that risk.
For sure. How has he looked, and what's his outlook as a not only a rookie quarterback in the NFL as a starter, but also, you had Elway, and then you had those few years with Peyton Manning, but since Peyton Manning, that quarterback position in Denver has been rough. So, like, what's the outlook for him, not only as a rookie, but on this particular Broncos team?
Yeah, you're not wrong. Every time the Broncos play a nationally televised game lately, they do that graphic where it's like a literal carousel, and there's a quarterback on each pony just going around, because since Peyton Manning retired, let's go. We'll rush through this, Gary. 2016, Trevor Siemian, and I think
Case Keenum.
Siemian played all 16 games. No, I'm sorry. Yes, all 16 games in 2016. Maybe Paxton Lynch. Paxton Lynch started 2 games that year. So Trevor Siemian, Paxton Lynch. 2017 was Lynch, Siemian, and Brock Osweiler, who came back
Awesome.
for a brief stint in 2017.
Yeah.
2018 was Case Keenum the whole season. 2019, Joe Flacco, Brandon Allen, Drew Lock, and Brett Rippon didn't get a start in 19. Flacco, Allen, maybe it was Flacco, Allen, and Lock in 2019.
Yeah.
2020, Lock, Jeff
Yeah.
Driscoll, Brett Rippon, and they had a game. You'll probably remember this in 2020, the COVID season, in
Philip
which they
Lindsay.
did not have a quarterback. It was Philip Lindsay and Kendall Hinton, a
Yeah.
running back and a receiver, basically against Sean Payton's Saints of all teams. 2021, Teddy Bridgewater and Drew Lock. 2022, Russell Wilson and Brett Rippon, and last year Russell Wilson and Jarrett Stidham. So that's 10, 12, whatever it is. And then Bo Nix will be the seventh week one starter for the Broncos in the last 9 years. So you are absolutely right. It has been a chaotic carousel. So really that's the interesting part of this is, and we got a chance at this groundbreaking thing today. The Broncos breaking ground on a new training facility to talk to Greg Penner, the owner of the team. And he said he called Bo Nix shortly after he got announced as the starter about 10 days ago now. And he said, first of all, just congratulated him, talked about how much he appreciated the poise that he played with, the maturity that he showed in kind of having this three-way quarterback competition throughout camp. But then he also said, look, rookies, like, we know that there's going to be some up and downs to this. We have your back. We are going to support you through that, because it would be, there's a lot of excitement and optimism about Nix right now. The way that he played in the preseason, the way that he's grown. Mike McGlinchey, his right tackle, said today the thing that's impressed him the most is how rapid his improvement has been. So there's a lot of but you also have to look at this through a historical lens. And quite frankly, rookie quarterbacks, even the ones that get drafted high, even the ones with all the hype, that had all the experience, whatever the case might be, the majority of them struggle. There's exceptions. CJ Stroud last year was certainly one of those, but there are going to be bumps in the road that could arrive as soon as September 8th when they go to Seattle for week one. So the idea for Nix is that they want him to understand that he is just part of this. He does not have to do anything more than his job. But of course, we know, covering this game as long as you and I have, that like the quarterback position, it just has that spotlight on it at all times. And so I think people are optimistic. I do sense that fans are understanding of the fact, part of it is this whole team has done a pretty hard reset. The Broncos went to Seattle to open the 2022 season. It was the first game for Russell Wilson. He went back to Seattle. They're going to go back to Seattle for week one 2 years later. Only 14 players who played in the 22 game are going to play in the 24 game. Like, that's how much Sean Payton has overturned this roster in the last 2 years. So it's been a long time coming for a team that hasn't made the playoffs since 2015. So again, it's not just that they're understanding there's going to be growing pains with Bo. I think that's overall what this year is going to be. So I think what their hope for him is that he continues to get better. He continues to learn from the things that will happen. He continues to show that poise and maturity that has been a staple of his throughout his brief NFL career so far. And that ultimately, as they build into 2025 and beyond, he's going to be the guy. And so I don't think they're expecting him to be the guy this year in terms of being one of the NFL's better quarterbacks. It's going to take time. But to this point, they have to go with what they've seen, and they've been really impressed.
Yeah. Where do you kind of force? I mean, since the season is now right upon us, I just got a notification that it's my turn to draft in my little friend group's draft. How do you
Don't let me
kind of?
keep you from that, man. I don't
No,
want to have
no,
to
no.
make you auto draft.
No, what's funny is the app that we're using is the Sleeper app, and my buddy who set it up, like, we all could not find. I mean, we're all dads with kids and jobs and stuff, and so it was really hard to find one
At time.
time for us
Yeah,
to do it.
I
And he
feel that.
set he set it to where we can pick, like, when it's my pick, it's not like I have 2 minutes or 5 minutes. He set it to 24 hours.
Oh, wow.
So so literally I have until this time tomorrow to make my like 14th round pick here. So pretty
Okay,
sweet.
cool.
It's pretty
Cool.
sweet, really.
That's
Uh,
not that's actually pretty smart. Yeah, as somebody who was like, I was doing a fantasy draft last night. I was like reading I had my phone next to me. I'm like reading my son his bedtime story, and and then pulling up my thing, and I'm like, all right, bud, who should we draft here? Malik Neighbors or Derrick Henry. Like, what are we doing here? So I feel you there.
That's funny.
Yeah. So you were saying like kind of
Yeah.
outlook as the season's about to start.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be a year for the Broncos. Look, Sean Payton has never won fewer than 7 games as an NFL head coach. Vegas is putting the Broncos at about 5.5. I think 7-10 is probably a reasonable expectation for Denver. It is a team that went 8-9 last year, and they feel like in a lot of ways they got better. One thing they'll be much better at is stopping the run. They were among the worst in the league last year. They went out and they got John Franklin Myers from the Jets. They got Malcolm Roach, former Saints defensive lineman. They added a lot to that group, and believe they're going to be a lot more stout up front. And that, as you know, covering the sport as long as you have, like if you can stop the run, that bleeds into a lot of other things. And they think offensively they're going to be more efficient. Look, Bo Nix doesn't have the experience that Russell Wilson did, but I think the hope is that they're going to be better in the areas that they weren't last year, like red zone, where Nix's kind of really quick release, quick processing is going to be able to help them be more efficient down there. But the bottom line is they have a really young team. They're because of the financial restrictions caused by cutting Wilson and eating all that money, they weren't able to go out and spend in free agency like they maybe would have otherwise. So there are some spots on this roster where you're playing young guys. You're leaning on guys that don't have a ton of experience, and typically in the NFL, it takes time for those kind of guys to become really trusted players, even if the long term outlook is good. So yeah, I think 7-10, somewhere around there. Like there is a ceiling where they could get hot, they could start well, build some confidence, and maybe squeak into the playoffs as a wild card team. But I think fans this year, because again, this is a team has had 8 straight seasons without a playoff appearance, 7 straight losing seasons. But I sense from the fan base that it's a year where they're going to be a little bit more understanding, if not okay, with the idea that there's going to be some losses along the way, but that it's hopefully pointing in, there's an actual vision to this now.
Yeah. You mentioned you kind of nailed the 12th overall pick, with y'all putting your picks in the bowl. Speaking of bowls, the Super Bowl, who do you think, if you had a pick, like who's going from the AFC, NFC, who do you think are the contenders there?
Well, that was a well done transition by you.
I try.
Applause there. um, Look, I've been lucky enough covering this team and the league since 2020 to get to see a lot of Patrick Mahomes football. I'm not betting against that guy. I've made that mistake in the past, and I know there's not been a team that's won 3 in a row. And that is a really difficult task. But I look at them and say, hey, what was their one problem that they dealt with last year? They didn't have enough receiving talent. They go out and they get Marquise Hollywood. They draft Xavier Worthy. Travis Kelce looks like he's still gonna be able to do it for a couple more years. Like, I'm just not going to pick against that team. So I think the Chiefs are going to get there in the AFC. And then in the NFC, I think it's Detroit's year. I think it's Detroit's year to take that leap that they nearly fully made a year ago. They very easily could have won that game in San Francisco and made it to the Super Bowl. So I'm going Chiefs and Lions Super Bowl with the Chiefs. Look, which earns me no friends out here, obviously. But the Chiefs winning the Super Bowl for their 3rd in a row.
Yeah, that'll definitely earn you some engagement on X for sure. That's
Yeah.
about all that will gain you. Yeah, I mean, I wrote down 4 teams, like, and two of them are the ones you said. I ultimately just said, like, I don't think the Chiefs can do it 3 in a row, and that's based on nothing. I
Yeah.
mean, they probably will. It's
It's based on
probably,
history, though.
I mean,
There's no
maybe,
historical
yeah.
precedent for it.
Right. And it's like it's got to be someone else's year, that kind of deal. And I think Baltimore is going to be a factor this year. So I really like them. And then I was kind of in that toss up between Lions and Niners, and ultimately said Niners. I think that would be a fun one. Just Ravens, Niners, just the styles and the guys that would be in that game. I'd love to see Derrick Henry as an
Yeah.
Alabama guy.
There you
I would
go.
I would love to see him in that in that position if he's healthy and contributing. So, but either way, any four of those teams that would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, 100%. I think well, and you mentioned that Kansas City and Baltimore, like midway through this season, I believe it's weeks 8 and 9. It might be weeks 9 and 10. It's one of those two. The Broncos have back-to-back road games at Kansas City, at Baltimore. So if Bo Nix comes out of that unscathed, then I think the Broncos will know that they really have something, because yeah, I'm with you. Baltimore, there's no reason to think that they're going to fall off in any kind of way. Buffalo always seems to sort of hang around. I grew up a Dolphins fan when I was a kid, so I've always kind of kept an eye on them, and their big thing has just been, again, cold weather, December, January. Like, can they actually get it done? Because the talent is still there, and Mike McDaniel knows what he's doing as an offensive whiz. So the AFC, I think there's a lot more talent in the AFC than there is the NFC, and so that would make a three-peat for Kansas City, I think, all the more impressive. So I'm eager to see. It's going to be a fun year.
Yeah, it definitely is. I can't wait for it to get started. And it looks like, let's see, yes, Broncos kick off the NFL season Sunday, September 8th, 3:05 p.m. Central on CBS at Seattle. Bo Nix's debut. Nick, how can people read that story? How do they go find it and get their Bo Nix fix before the season gets kicked off?
Yeah, so go to theathletic.com/Broncos. I almost feel like this beat has become kind of the Bo Nix beat. You're gonna find stuff that we've already written about him. Kind of throughout training camp, going back to when he was drafted in late April. But yeah, the piece that I'm working on that kind of touches back to his early days there on the Alabama high school football scene. That will come out on Tuesday, September 3rd. If I'm
Yeah.
if I'm right there, all these
Yeah.
days are blending together. But yeah, Tuesday, September 3rd. That'll be up by the time, in the morning. So go to theathletic.com /Broncos. And in fact, yeah, that'll be the day that's up. So thanks for letting me shout that out.
Yeah, and that will be coincidentally, actually completely not coincidentally, the day that this podcast drops. So people will be able to listen to this and go straight to that story and see how things are going for Bo out in the Mile High City. So I certainly appreciate you taking the time, Nick, and talking about Bo, and certainly reaching out. And it's been good to meet you this way, and looking forward to following your work going forward.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Gary. I appreciate it. One more question I had seen on your
Yeah.
previous podcast, you were wearing a Celtics hat. Where's the Celtics hat today?
Hey, okay. Hey, I've got to brand this thing a little bit, so I've
oh,
got to,
that's okay. I see. Nice. Yeah.
yeah. So I've got to brand that, but the Celtics hat will be back.
So
Right now,
how does a guy from Alabama become a Celtics fan?
well, I'm a huge history buff. I'm in all the local historical groups and all that.
Yeah.
My YouTube channel is weird because it's not completely niche. Like, you'll have all my high school football and podcasts and stuff like that, and then you're going to have tons of history stuff. Like, I just completed a 4-hour video project on the Civil War. Like, I
Oh, that's
love it.
awesome. Yeah.
So that's kind of how, honestly, is just the history
Their
that goes
history.
along with the Celtics, but more so Boston as a whole.
Yeah.
Um, we went up there in 2016 and did every touristy thing you can do in Boston. And you know how if you build up a vacation in your mind and it's going to be this big grand thing, and then it rains, or something isn't what you thought it would be, or that food didn't taste as good as you thought, whatever, those kind of things. None of that happened when we went to Boston. it
It went the
it
other way.
it met or exceeded every expectation that I put on it, and I couldn't get away from it after that. So
That's awesome.
every time the Celtics are down here playing the Hawks, I pretty much try to get me a corner seat up in the area where I can afford it, and squint for 2 hours and watch them beat the Hawks. This year, unfortunately, I can't go. Like, last year, they played the Hawks twice in the same week in Atlanta in like March. And
Okay.
then this year, they're only coming to Atlanta once, and it's like early in the season. It's like November 5th or something
Uh,
like that. So
kind of a
not
busy
able,
time.
yeah, not able to go to that one during football season. So, but rest assured, this fall the Celtics hat will make a return
Okay.
for
Well,
sure.
I pull for the Celtics a little bit. Obviously, we have a pretty darn good basketball team out here that
Yeah,
thanks to Nikola Jokic, people have really fallen in
yeah.
love with. But Derek White was a
Colorado.
Colorado high school.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even say star because he was
Mm-hmm.
really good, but nobody knew him. He was 140 pounds soaking wet. And, I'm sure you, watching the Celtics and,
Oh
nationally,
gosh.
people started to understand his story, a
Yeah.
little bit. But I was watching Derek since he was playing, there at Legend High School in Parker, Colorado, and then, University of Colorado at Colorado Springs, the Division II school where he started. And,
Wow. Yeah.
remember going to watch a game. I was working for the Denver Post at the time, and I pitched to my editor like, "Hey, I know we don't typically cover like the D2 scene because there's a league in Colorado that's pretty good called the RMAC, the Rocky Mountain Athletic Conference." And I said, "I just think this kid is, I've had some people tell me like, to watch out for him." And so I go to this game, and he's playing really well. And but there's a point in the game, I think it was in the second half, he throws kind of like a cross court pass, kind of a dumb pass, and it gets picked off. And so he's trailing the play. He's got to be like 10 feet behind the play at this time. And the guy picked the ball off near half court. And you're just saying like, there's no way that he gets back.
Yeah.
And yet he took like 3 or 4 huge strides and comes back and like blocks this shot, and then gets the ball in transition the other way, and hits this three. And you're just like, yeah, this dude's a little different. And of course, by then people locally were catching on. CU caught on, went and had a great year there. And then just, to get to start your career in
Wow.
San Antonio, I think that's the way that you wanted to do it. There were a lot of people around here that were mad that year that they did not draft him, because I think gosh, I'm trying to think of what year he came out, but that they ended up drafting Tyler Lydon. I think it was 2017. The Nuggets did. And there was certainly some disappointment locally, like, hey, how are you going to not draft that kid? And
Yeah,
so
he was, 2017 draft. He was the 29th pick.
okay. And so the Nuggets drafted where? 20 something.
Let's let's see. Denver, Denver, Denver. Where you at? Where you at? Where you at? I'm not where why am I not seeing Denver?
They drafted Tyler Lydon out of Syracuse, and he never really played.
Let's see. They
It was in the
27.
it was in the
Wow.
20s.
Okay. Yeah, because they had the 13th pick that they traded to Utah, which turned out to be Donovan Mitchell.
Right. Yep.
Yikes
Yep.
there.
Yeah.
And then traded to Tyler Lydon. Yeah, he was the 24th pick by the Jazz in that deal, traded
Yeah.
to the
Right.
Nuggets.
Right. So
Wow.
yeah, and so yeah, there was a lot of like, why not Derek White? But obviously it worked out for both, right? Nuggets got
Yeah,
their title, and Celtics got theirs with Derek White a year later. So everybody wins.
that's right. That's right.
Yep.
Well, I appreciate your time, Nick. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely, Gary. And anytime, maybe mid-season we can come back on here and talk
Yeah,
Bo again, and be happy to do it.
I'd love to. I'd love to. Let's do it.
All right. Take care.
All right. You too.